America is often celebrated as a land of freedom, democracy, and opportunity. Its story is one of courage, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of liberty. Yet beneath this proud narrative lies a darker, more turbulent history, one marked by fear, violence, and the deadly consequences of political conflict. From the earliest days of the Republic to modern times, Americans have repeatedly taken up arms, clashed in the streets, and even resorted to bombings in the name of ideology, justice, or resistance. These moments are often overlooked in school history books, yet they reveal the raw struggle for power, rights, and influence that has shaped the nation. In some cases, citizens rose against oppressive taxes, corrupt institutions, or unfair labor conditions. In others, radical activists turned to extreme measures to protest war, government overreach, or social injustice. The human cost was enormous. Hundreds lost their lives, entire communities were destabilized, and the nation was forced to confront uncomfortable truths about authority, dissent, and the fragility of social order. In this video, we explore 10 of the deadliest political events in U.S. history. Each event offers a window into the struggles, tensions, and conflicts that have tested the resilience of American society. By examining these moments, we gain insight not only into the history of violence, but also into the enduring forces of power, ideology, and resistance that continue to shape the United States today. In the years following the American Revolution, the new nation faced enormous economic challenges. Soldiers returned home to find themselves in debt, farmers struggled under high taxes, and the weak Articles of Confederation left the federal government powerless to intervene. In Massachusetts, these tensions erupted into open rebellion. Daniel Shays, a former Revolutionary War captain, led thousands of discontented farmers and war veterans in armed protests against foreclosures and oppressive taxes. The rebellion reached its peak when Shays and his followers attempted to seize the federal arsenal at Springfield in January 1787. The state militia met them with force, ultimately quelling the uprising. While the immediate conflict ended without large-scale casualties, the event sent shockwaves through the nation. It revealed the fragility of the young republic and exposed the dangers of an underpowered central government. Shays Rebellion was more than a local disturbance. It was a warning. Lawmakers and citizens alike saw firsthand the potential for civil unrest when economic pressures went unchecked. The uprising directly influenced the drafting of the U.S. Constitution, ensuring a stronger federal government capable of maintaining order and enforcing laws. It also left a lasting impression on the American psyche, highlighting the delicate balance between protecting citizens' rights and maintaining social stability. The rebellion illustrated that political violence could emerge not just from ideological divisions, but also from systemic economic hardships, a lesson that would echo throughout American history. Less than a decade later, the young United States faced another test of authority. To fund its growing debts, the federal government, under Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton, imposed an excise tax on whiskey in 1791. For Western Pennsylvania farmers, who often distilled surplus grain into whiskey to survive, this tax felt like an unjust economic burden. Protests quickly escalated into violence as farmers resisted collectors, threatened tax officials, and disrupted court proceedings. By 1794, the situation reached a tipping point. President George Washington, determined to assert federal authority, called up a militia force of nearly 13,000 troops to quell the rebellion, one of the largest military mobilizations in the nation's early history. When the army marched into Pennsylvania, resistance collapsed, and the leaders of the uprising were arrested, though most were later pardoned. The Whiskey Rebellion was a defining moment for the fledgling republic. It demonstrated that the federal government had both the right and the power to enforce its laws, even in the face of armed opposition. At the same time, it highlighted ongoing tensions between rural communities and distant authorities, tensions that would continue to flare in various forms across the country. Like Shays' Rebellion before it, the Whiskey Rebellion underscored the delicate balance between civic dissent and violent resistance, a theme that resonates throughout the history of U.S. political conflicts. By the mid-19th century, cities like Philadelphia were growing rapidly, fueled by waves of immigration. Many of the newcomers were Irish Catholics, seeking refuge from famine and poverty. Their arrival, however, sparked resentment among native-born Protestants who feared job competition, cultural change, and religious influence. These tensions reached a boiling point in 1844. A conflict over local elections and control of public schools escalated into violent riots. Mobs clashed in the streets, setting fires, destroying property, and attacking immigrant communities. At least 20 people were killed, and the city was thrown into chaos. Martial law was eventually imposed, and the National Guard was called in to restore order. The Philadelphia Nativist riots highlighted the dangers of xenophobia and identity-based political conflict. They demonstrated that deep-seated prejudices could erupt into violence, destabilizing communities and threatening social cohesion. This event is an early example of how America's struggle with immigration, diversity, and political power has long had the potential to turn deadly, a pattern repeated in various forms throughout the nation's history. In the 1850s, the question of whether new states would permit slavery ignited fierce conflict across the United States. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854 allowed settlers in those territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, a concept known as popular sovereignty. The law created an immediate flashpoint. Pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers flooded into Kansas, each side determined to control the territory's future. Violence erupted almost immediately. Armed militias clashed in towns, farms were burned, and political leaders were assassinated. Hundreds of lives were lost during the period that became known as Bleeding Kansas. The chaos was a grim prelude to the American Civil War, demonstrating how deeply national divisions over slavery could spill into local communities with lethal consequences. Bleeding Kansas revealed the deadly potential of ideological conflict when combined with weak government oversight. It was a stark example of how political decisions, particularly those about morality, rights, and power, can ignite violent confrontations, foreshadowing the larger national struggle that would soon engulf the country. In the late 19th century, industrialization transformed the United States, but workers often bore the brunt of harsh conditions. Long hours, low wages, and unsafe workplaces fueled widespread labor unrest. On May 4, 1886, in Chicago, a peaceful rally at Haymarket Square, protesting police violence against striking workers, erupted into chaos. A bomb was thrown into the crowd, killing 7 police officers and at least 4 civilians, while dozens more were injured. In the aftermath, authorities arrested dozens of labor leaders, many of whom were radicals advocating for workers' rights. Public fear of anarchists and labor activists surged, and the nation was gripped by panic and outrage. The Haymarket affair became a symbol of the volatility of industrial-era labor relations and the potential for political violence when social and economic grievances collide with heavy-handed law enforcement. It highlighted the struggle between workers demanding justice and authorities determined to maintain order, showing that even in peacetime, political and social tensions could explode with deadly consequences. By the 1890s, America's rapid industrial growth had created immense wealth, but also deep economic inequality. The Pullman Company, which manufactured railroad cars, cut wages without reducing rents in its company town, sparking outrage among workers. The American Railway Union, led by Eugene V. Debs, organized a nationwide strike to protest the unfair conditions. The strike soon paralyzed rail traffic, prompting President Grover Cleveland to send federal troops to restore order. Clashes between strikers and soldiers turned violent, resulting in the deaths of more than 30 people and leaving hundreds injured. Rail cars and buildings were destroyed in the turmoil. The Pullman strike was a stark demonstration of the federal government's willingness to intervene on the side of corporate interests during labor disputes. It also underscored the growing tension between workers seeking fair treatment and authorities protecting economic stability. The strike left a lasting legacy, influencing labor laws and the rise of organized labor movements, while showing how disputes over wages and rights could escalate into deadly conflict. In the early 20th century, coal mining in West Virginia was grueling and dangerous, with miners often living in company towns under strict control. Wages were low, working conditions were brutal, and attempts to unionize were violently suppressed by mine owners' private militias. Tensions reached a boiling point in 1921 when thousands of armed miners marched on Logan County in what became known as the Battle of Blair Mountain. The conflict was one of the largest armed uprisings in U.S. history since the Civil War. Miners fought against law enforcement and private militias, and both sides suffered significant casualties. Federal troops were eventually deployed, using planes and machine guns to end the confrontation. Around 100 men lost their lives, and hundreds more were injured. Blair Mountain was a stark reminder of the deadly consequences of economic exploitation and the struggle for labor rights. The uprising highlighted the extreme measures people were willing to take when denied basic fairness, and it exposed the brutal lengths corporations and authorities would go to maintain control. This violent confrontation remains a powerful symbol of the intersection between labor, law, and political power in American history. In 1929, the textile industry in the American South was notorious for its low wages, long hours, and oppressive conditions. Workers in the Loray Mill in Gastonia, North Carolina, organized a strike to demand better pay and safer working conditions. The protest quickly escalated as police and strikebreakers clashed with the striking workers. Gunfire, beatings, and arrests marked the conflict, and several lives were lost during the struggle. The mill owners, supported by local authorities, resisted the workers' demands with force, demonstrating the power imbalance between laborers and industrialists. The strike ultimately failed to achieve its immediate goals, but it drew national attention to the plight of textile workers and inspired future labor movements across the South. The Loray Mill strike illustrates the human cost of industrialization and the persistent struggle for workers' rights in the face of entrenched power. It serves as a grim reminder that economic injustice and political oppression can provoke violent resistance, even in communities far removed from the political centers of the nation. During the 1970s, the United States was deeply divided over the Vietnam War, civil rights, and the pace of social change. Out of this unrest emerged the Weather Underground, a radical left-wing organization that believed violent action was necessary to protest government policies and push for revolutionary change. The group carried out a series of bombings targeting government buildings, military installations, and banks. While they carefully planned their attacks to avoid human casualties, property destruction and the threat of violence created widespread fear across the nation. The bombings were intended as political statements, but they also demonstrated the potential for ideological extremism to escalate into domestic terrorism. The Weather Underground's actions forced the government to confront new forms of political violence. It highlighted the danger of radicalization when citizens feel alienated from political processes and believe conventional avenues of protest are ineffective. The group's campaign was a stark reminder that violent ideology can emerge even in a democratic society, creating fear and uncertainty while challenging the limits of law enforcement and civil liberties. In the spring of 1995, the United States faced one of its deadliest acts of domestic terrorism. Timothy McVeigh, an anti-government extremist, detonated a massive truck bomb outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City. The explosion killed 168 people, including children, and injured over 600 others. The attack shocked the nation and underscored the devastating impact of extremist ideology when combined with lethal intent. Unlike previous labor or protest-related violence, the Oklahoma City bombing targeted civilians on a massive scale, illustrating the evolution of political violence from local disputes and economic grievances to outright terrorism. McVeigh's motivations stem from a belief that the federal government was oppressive, echoing anti-government sentiments present throughout U.S. history, but taken to a horrific extreme. The bombing led to a nationwide reassessment of domestic security, counterterrorism strategies, and the psychological impact of extremist beliefs. The Oklahoma City bombing remains a defining moment in American history, highlighting the catastrophic consequences of extremism and the ongoing struggle to maintain safety in a free society. From Shays Rebellion in the 18th century to the Oklahoma City bombing in the late 20th century, the history of political violence in the United States reveals recurring patterns of economic stress, ideological conflict, and power struggles. These 10 events show that when grievances go unaddressed, or when individuals or groups believe the system is unjust, the result can escalate into deadly confrontation. America's history of political violence is a powerful reminder that liberty and safety are not guaranteed. They must be actively protected. By studying these events, we gain insight into the forces that drive people to extreme action and learn vital lessons for shaping a more just and peaceful society.